who I knew were unarmed.
And every one of the 13 was a rebel. He had a weapon of some sort. Otherwise, he wouldn't be up there dead.
No way was there any bombs thrown at the soldiers. You know, it was a deliberate lie. Being an eyewitness did, you knew.
One must regret that it ever happened, but I don't think the army has anything to be ashamed of.
On Sunday, January the 30th, 1972, 26 people were shot when British soldiers rerouted a civil rights march in Northern Ireland. Bloody Sunday, as it's now called, shocked the world. It was the one event that set the agenda for the next 20 years of violence in the community.
He was just murdered. That's the way I feel. He never got a chance. 19 only. He never got a chance to live.
The shootings took place in one of the most sensitive parts of this disputed territory, Londonderry, a city poised on the boundary between the northern and southern parts of Ireland. For 18 minutes, the Bogside, one of Derry's Catholic housing estates, became a battlefield. 13 died, 13 were injured. The soldiers said they'd shot only bombers or gunmen. The locals said they were all innocent. Bloody Sunday has left a bitter legacy in the city.
The day after Bloody Sunday, there was an air of disbelief, incredulity, silence. I think there were just groups of people standing, talking. And then the funerals, which were very dignified. But after that, then there was an enormous anger, tremendous anger, and an intense fury.
It was the greatest recruiting thing that happened for the IRA in this area. And a large number of the people who became involved in that campaign of violence became involved after that. It was a watershed in terms of the violence. It was a watershed in terms of Irish politics. It was a watershed in terms of how the whole of Ireland perceived Britain.
To allay public fears about the shootings, the government appointed Lord Widgery, then Britain's most senior judge, to lead a public inquiry. They built a model of the Bogside, and for 20 days Lord Widgery heard evidence from soldiers and from civilians. But his report only fueled the arguments. With a few individual exceptions, he exonerated the soldiers and condemned some of those they killed as gunmen. The army heard this with relief. The people of Derry condemned it as a whitewash.
What really made Bloody Sunday so obscene was the fact that people afterwards, at the highest level in British justice, justified it. And I think that is the real obscenity.
We've been back to the Bogside to reconsider Widgery's verdict. We've uncovered new evidence about why so many died. We've discovered flaws in the forensic evidence. And for the first time in 20 years, we'll hear from soldiers who were there on the day. For security reasons, none wanted to be filmed, so we've used actors to recreate tape-recorded conversations which reveal why so many were shot in just 15 minutes in Derry.
Discrimination in an urban situation like that between a civilian and the person who potentially could kill you, that's the real problem. So actually locating him is very difficult. The decision that you take then is, do I fire back at that target? And the amount of time you've got to take that decision is millionths of a second, and your life could depend on it. So you ain't going to take a fortnight to decide whether it is or it isn't, are you? Obviously, mistakes will happen. The soldier will err on his own side. He'll act which is most favourable to him. Nobody wants to die.
On a cold January day in 1972, thousands of marchers gathered for the start of the biggest demonstration ever seen in the city. It was against internment, the government's attempt to deal with the IRA by imprisoning suspects without trial. It was also the latest of many protests against a sectarian and corrupt local government system.
We carried placards as we were going along. People started singing, "We shall overcome," songs like these. Everyone was singing, chatting to each other. It was a very, very happy atmosphere.
As the marchers made their way down into the Bogside, they were heading for an area where British rule no longer applied. Today, the police and the army mount regular patrols inside the Bogside. But in 1972, this was almost a foreign country. The people of Free Derry had cut themselves off from the established authorities, their protest at a lamentable lack of civil rights. Inside Free Derry, the IRA had a free run. They carried weapons openly in public. There was little then the army could do about it.
It was a no-go area. It became the first no-go area in Northern Ireland. And that lasted for an awful long time. And it was an area of Derry, and there was a sign saying, "Welcome to Free Derry." Underneath that was a barricade, so that the British forces didn't have access to it. And it was bizarre because the IRA chaps, all in balaclavas and armed and paramilitary uniforms, were on one side of it. And a few yards down the road, in full view, was the British Army. It was rather like the sort of Berlin Wall situation, you know, where the two opposing sides are facing each other, and now that there's anything about it.
The army was waiting for the marchers on that fateful Sunday. The procession had been banned by the government, and soldiers set up barriers to prevent them from gathering in the city centre. Stewards rerouted the march, but a hard core of young men pushed through the cordon and tried to get to the city centre.
When we got as far as William Street, we were met at a barricade, soldiers. Well, it was a bit of a confrontation down there. Words were spoken, words were exchanged. And, of course, the officer in charge, he refused to let us go through. And, of course, we grabbed for the barbed wire fences, or whatever you call them. We grabbed for those, trying to part them, trying to make our way through. And the placards in which we were carrying were thrown at the army. And in retaliation, the army started off with gas and then plastic bullets, or as they were then, rubber bullets.
In 1972, riots were a regular feature of life in Londonderry. The pressure of serving amongst people who hated them took its toll on the soldiers.
I'll put it this way. How would you feel if you were getting verbal abuse, spat upon, things thrown at you, rocks thrown at you, one or two of your mates with a brick in his face and blood streaming down? One particular, we were down near the shopping centre, and this girl, about 18-year-old, she walks up and she's got a paper in her hand like this, and there's an awful big dirty dog turd in it. She just walked up and shoved it in his face. British bastard. And you just have to stand there and take that because you're under orders not to retaliate. I mean, how would you feel? Frustration, I would say. That's the best way of putting it. It's frustrating.
If the squaddies on the ground were fed up with what was going on in Free Derry, so was the Army High Command. In private briefings in the run-up to the march, officers told journalists they were not going to stand for it much longer.
It became very clear that Free Derry had become very politically unacceptable to the British government in London and very embarrassing to the army in Northern Ireland, and that they were going to do something about it to get rid of this anomaly, this no-go area.
The man who'd taken charge of the army in Northern Ireland just a few months before Bloody Sunday, Major General Robert Ford, had left no doubts about his new approach towards those who snub British authority.
If the enemy uses higher firepower, we shall have to use the minimum force necessary to restore that particular instant, and we will do. We will counter anything they use with the proper force, the necessary force. In other words, you will be taking tougher measures. We shall certainly be taking tough measures.
Major General Ford's tough measures that day in Londonderry were the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, then and now the toughest soldiers in the British Army. They'd been brought into the city to make arrests if rioting broke out. The army said they were the only experienced squad available.
I think the people were very frightened of the Parachute Regiment. They've got a certain reputation, and these red berets do tend to have a psychological impact on people. The Paras hadn't been in the area before, and they're renowned as very, very tough troops. And if you see a lot of Paras coming at you, you tend to get a bit frightened. And I suspect that was it. It was a psychological use of the Parachute Regiment.
These were really tough individuals. I had received a number of complaints from the general public that they had been threatened, that they had been told, we're going to deal with you this afternoon, or words to that effect. And I also, of course, saw the paratroopers myself on the side street, and they seemed to be hyped up. I think that's the best way. They were a different breed to what we had accustomed ourselves to in Derry. Tough, resolute, and hyped up.
As the tail end of the procession came down William Street into the Bogside, the paratroopers fired the shots that began Bloody Sunday. Damien Donaghy and a handful of other young men were throwing stones at soldiers who had positioned themselves on buildings that have since been demolished on the other side of the street.
There was a bit of rioting because the army were in the bakery over there, and they were on the rooftops, and there were soldiers on the roof over there too. And then we kind of dropped the stones and were walking away again. Then I just turned. The next thing I knew, I was shot. I was lying on my back, you know. I was shot in the leg. My leg was broke. I was in hospital for nearly 6 months.
Were you doing anything at that time that the soldiers could have thought was aggressive?
No, nothing at all. Wasn't doing nothing at that time.
The soldier who shot him didn't agree, as he told Lord Widgery, and as his platoon sergeant explained in a TV interview.
One of my men shot him in the process of throwing an elbow. This was in the William Street area, before the actual main onslaught that they talk about started. Now they're talking about us firing indiscriminately. Where does this say come in what they can do?
The people that were shot were all innocent people. And as I says, if anybody had nail bombs or been shooting at them or anything, so they would have been charged straight after it. You know? And nobody was ever charged after it. So it was all lies. Police and the government tell lies, trying to cover up themselves. That's all they could do.
Donaghy was shot 15 minutes before the bulk of the shootings, but the conflict of evidence over what happened to him was typical of all the deaths and injuries. Soldiers and civilian eyewitnesses gave utterly opposed accounts at the tribunal. So was Donaghy a nail bomber? Betty and William Curran were very near Donaghy when he was shot. They were marchers, not rioters, and they saw exactly what happened.
I saw the helmets of the soldiers, about 4 heads pointing the rifles over into William Street. The boys saw the soldiers, and there was a lot of stones about West Ground, so we lifted a handful of stones and threw them to soldiers. Soldiers got down,
sort of disappeared, got down. The boys threw the stones, walked across William Street, slowly, just walked casually across the street towards us. One of them had lagged behind. A shot rang out. And a couple of shots rang out. And
that's when you grabbed me and said, get on off.
They're firing rubber bullets.
Get back, they're firing rubber bullets. At that stage, I said to him, it's not rubber bullets, it's live bullets. Because I had seen the fella falling, and I had seen this like a brown thing going down, hitting the ground and back up again. So he ran over to lift the lad, and I ran on the middle of the road, and I was calling the soldiers, what the hell, that's the way I said it, what the hell did you shoot a lad for? He wasn't doing anything.
A second man, John Johnson, was shot and wounded next to Donaghy. The soldier who fired told Lord Widgery he too was a bomber.
As far as I'm concerned, if a man throws a nail bomb at my platoon or at me, he deserves the only thing I can hit him back with, and a rubber bullet will not stop a nail bomber. So the only thing you can stop him with is with a bullet, as far as I'm concerned.
There was no nail bombs in that vicinity. None. In that vicinity where Damien Donaghy was shot, there was no nail bombs.
No.
None at all.
Categorically no nail bombs.
Lord Widgery agreed that 2 innocent men had been shot, but his report did not condemn the soldiers either for firing or for perjury.
I accept that they thought, rightly or wrongly, that the missiles being thrown towards them included a nail bomb or bombs, and that one of the members of the crowd was engaged in suspicious action similar to that of striking a match and lighting a nail bomb. The soldiers fired in the belief that they were entitled to do so by their orders.
Shortly after the shooting of Donaghy and Johnson, the army ordered the paratroopers into the Bogside to arrest as many rioters as they could.
Orders were being shouted at the back of me. You could hear the orders, get on board, get on board. And round the corner into William Street came these armoured personnel carriers with lots of troops in the back. The back doors were open. The troops were very heavily armed with rifles. And I was standing next to General Robert Ford at the time, who was a new commander in there. And he was waving his swaggering stick, saying, "Go on, the Paras, go and get them, go on, go and get them." And then all it was me.
The paratroopers were the first British troops to enter Free Derry in daylight for 6 months. They'd been briefed that they might be heading into an IRA ambush. They'd heard about the shootings in William Street. In just 18 minutes, the soldiers killed 13 people. 11 more were injured. Nine were shot around the courtyard of the Glenfarder Park flats. 4 people died here. 5 died and 1 was wounded near a makeshift rubble barricade that ran across the road from Glenfarder Park. And they shot 9 more, killing 4 near the tall Rossville flats, now demolished and replaced by a car park.
We accuse the Colonel of the Parachute Regiment of willful murder. We accuse the soldiers of shooting indiscriminately into a fleeing crowd, of gloating over casualties, of preventing medical and spiritual aid reaching some of the dying. It is untrue that shots were fired at the troops in Rossville Street before they attacked. It is untrue that any of the dead or wounded that we attended were armed.
Among those local eyewitnesses who say that your men fired first and indiscriminately, there are priests, local priests and doctors. Would you say that they are lying?
Well, I've been asked by some of your colleagues on the other channels the same question, and I say again that I hesitate to call anyone liars, but the facts are we were fired at first, and we retaliated in the only way which was possible to us.
The question of who fired first after the soldiers stormed into Free Derry is still a major controversy. The soldiers were adamant they'd not fired until fired upon.
As we started to move the arrestees back to the pig, the armoured vehicle, we come under fairly heavy fire from Muswell Flats itself. We got the prisoners into the back of the pig. My men then took up fire positions. We started to locate the gunmen and return the fire.
Now, what do you mean? You came under fairly heavy fire. What do you mean?
I should think we come under fire from at least 5 positions, 4 to 5 positions on that flat. Firing a multiple of different types of weapons.
Civilian eyewitnesses told a different story. An Englishman who settled in Londonderry had a camera with him as he looked out of his window in the tall Rossville flats.
The thing I noticed was clouds of gas, and the crowd was put in their place and started to come towards the flats, running in direction towards the Free Derry corner. Then I noticed the armoured personnel cars, APCs, coming in around the corner. There were 3, and then a couple of Bedford 3-tonners. I was sickened because the soldiers got out of these APCs and they were just firing away, as I thought, indiscriminately, just firing away, banging away. The only guns I saw were the ones the army had. I didn't see any gunmen or anything else. Then the first shots were definitely the army.
The present Bishop of Derry, Edward Daly, then a curate, was also in the area where the shooting started.
There were other soldiers, 2 or 3 soldiers, in a kneeling position, firing, down on one knee, firing in that position. They were talking and shouting to one another. They seemed to be very elated and very, very excited. They were not. Some of them were not taking cover. They were quite right out in the open. I am quite satisfied in my own mind that there was no fire on the soldiers from behind where I was. And I can speak quite categorically about this particular incident. I was there from the beginning to the end of it, and I'm quite satisfied that what happened on that day was murder carried out by men in uniform of people who were unarmed, and it's something that has burned into my mind ever since.
According to the army, the IRA had launched 80 attacks in the city in the fortnight before Bloody Sunday. They considered an IRA attack during the procession more than likely. The march organizers were also worried. One of them, Ivan Cooper, a lifelong pacifist, was so concerned he went to speak to the leader of the Provisional IRA.
I told him that the march, if it wasn't going to be non-violent, and unless I could receive assurances to that effect, that I would not be continuing to support it, and I would use my influence to have it called off. I was contacted again, and I was told the Provisional IRA would give an undertaking that they would not be in the vicinity of the march on the Sunday.
Why should you believe that that undertaking was real?
This is a very small community. I have been coming to the Bogside since I was 12 years of age. I worked in the shirt factories. It's a small community. Your ear is very close to the ground. I was satisfied, extremely satisfied, that I had got that assurance.
Both the provisional and the official IRA gave this assurance, concerned about losing support if innocent people died in an attack. But our research has revealed the presence of up to 3 gunmen in the Bogside when the paratroopers came in. We believe they were all official IRA men, mavericks present in the Bogside against orders. 1 and possibly 2 of them were near the tall Rossville flats, the area where the shooting started. The soldiers say they saw far more here. 1 man was even photographed returning the soldiers' fire.
A fellow came out of Chamberlain Street, along where that wall painting is now. A fellow about in his late 20s. He had a firearm, a short firearm, and he came along to the edge of this wall here, and he fired 1 or 2 shots. Now we screamed at him to go away because we were afraid that the Paras would have thought that we were firing from where we were, and he went away.
Several people saw the IRA men shoot after the soldiers opened up. No one saw them shoot first, but did they? What Paddy Walsh saw provides a clue as to what we think happened. He'd stopped by a betting office and was within eyesight of the very first paratroopers who came into the Bogside.
I stepped out and I seen 2 soldiers, I think it was 2 of them, and then one of them disappeared. And just as that I turned around, and this old lady come out of the door here, and I went over there to see her get on the road. And just at that minute, I seen the brick getting taken out of the wall, and I knew then it was live ammunition, which I never had experienced it before, you know.
So a soldier fired
have.
over your head, and, and a bullet hit the wall over there.
Take the window there, the second window, take the brick out of it.
That soldier gave evidence at the Widgery Tribunal. He said he'd fired 3 warning shots to ward off a hostile crowd. He also revealed that he'd heard no other shooting before firing these shots. This is what is most likely to have happened next. The sound of the soldier's shots raced up Chamberlain Street and was heard by the IRA gunman in the tall Rossville flats, then at the end of the street. The gunman also saw British soldiers invading Free Derry. We believe they disregarded orders and opened fire.
We had gone into an area that hadn't been encroached for 2 years, and there were people in there and they were armed. Their area was actually being invaded, and they grabbed whatever was available to them and they returned fire. That's my reaction. That's what I feel happened. It wasn't a set ambush, because I think they were taken totally by surprise.
The soldiers we have spoken to have detailed and coherent recollections of coming under fire first. But if they were shot at first, why were the eyewitnesses so certain the soldiers just opened up without reason?
All they heard was firing. Most of them were running for cover. You can't tell me any of them stood there and actually scanned around what was taking place at the time. I would say, yes, they probably did see paras jumping from the vehicles and firing, simply because the paras were under fire. They didn't see the shooting that was coming from behind them over their heads towards the paras. The majority of civilians I saw that day were lying down taking cover. They weren't standing up looking around them.
However, many people did see the soldiers shoot back once the firing had begun. And whoever fired first, it's clear from the 150 eyewitnesses we've seen that many innocent people were shot. All the soldiers told Lord Widgery they'd fired only at gunmen or nail bombers. But the facts are clear. Only one of Bloody Sunday's victims had any links with a paramilitary group. Gerard Donaghy was a member of the Provisional IRA's youth wing. The rest of the dead and all the injured were civil rights supporters with no connections to the IRA. 5 of those killed and 3 of the wounded were shot in the back. No guns were found on any of the bodies. No soldier was injured by nail bombs or by gunfire. The paratroopers we've spoken to, who were closest to the start of the firing inside Free Derry, are now very reluctant to talk about what happened next.
You know, I've heard all sorts of stories, but nobody will tell me that I was not under fire. It was hitting the wall beside me. It was the heaviest I'd heard in Northern Ireland.
And did you see the gunman?
Now we're in an era where I'm not talking.
Why?
Why? Because I've got a life to lead. I don't want to spend the next 20 years looking over my shoulder. I've taken you further than I'm willing to go on that, without a doubt.
The first of the 13 people to die on Bloody Sunday was a 17-year-old called Jack Duddy.
As I was running in, this young lad, Jackie Duddy, came running towards me from over here somewhere. And he was kind of laughing, was excited. And the next thing, there was a shot. And he gasped just right beside me and fell. And I went over to him and I opened his shirt. He was covered in blood. He was gasping. And I took out my holy oils and I gave him the last rites. I knotted in the forehead. And I prayed with him a little. And then some other people crawled out beside me. Now, the paratroopers were within our view here. They were still firing. And we decided we'd make a dash to try to get young Jackie away. It was agreed that I'd go in front carrying a handkerchief. We were terrified. We got him up there. We lay him on the ground, but unfortunately at that time he was dead. I suppose there were times when we thought it was something in our imagination, that this was some kind of film we were seeing. It was very hard to believe it was reality.
he have anything in his hands when he was shot?
No, no, no.
Did he have a weapon? A bomb?
No, I didn't see anybody that day with a gun in the hand. The ones I saw, people I saw shot, definitely, I can swear to God that they didn't have a gun or a bomb in their hands at all.
Some did have stones in their hands. Michael Bradley was a near neighbour of Jack Duddy's. When he saw Duddy's blood-stained body lying in the courtyard of the Rossville flats, he lost control.
With the anger being in me and the bitterness being in me, I looked around for something to throw. Picking up these 2 stones, which I had held, one on my right and one on my left hand. I threw the stones. I just threw them. I didn't even know where I was throwing them. I just threw them straight in front of me. Straight in front of me, just. And as I thought, as when I let the stone go, as I went to throw, I felt this heaviness on my right arm, right upper arm. And I grabbed my arm, such as this. I thought someone gave me a thump, like, a thump in the arm, and I grabbed the arm like this. I looked over, and there I was, of astonishment. The blood was just flowing out of me. Blood was flowing down out of my arm. As I was taken to an ambulance, one of the local priests at the time came along, and he took out a handkerchief, started waving it. And Father Mulvey had asked for them to hold their fire till they got me into the ambulance. The officer replied to his men, "Hold your fire." And as that I was taken into the ambulance, I lay there. I felt the smell of flesh burning on me. My stomach was awful warm. My fear of death was in me. I thought I was going to die. When all of a sudden a body was put in alongside me. And a second body. Okay, I know now. To be Paddy Doherty and Hugh Gilmore.
Gilmore was 17 when he was shot dead. He was running away from the soldiers when they opened fire. Directly behind him at the time was a young male nurse.
All of a sudden there was 2 high-velocity shots, and Hugh Gilmore jumped into the air and shouted, "I've been hit." Initially I thought this may have been a rubber bullet, but it was quite clear from the expression on his face that it was much more serious than this. He ran a few more yards, just about reaching the door of Roswell Street Flats, and he began to fall. He wasn't doing anything at the time he was hit. He was running away, but he didn't have a nail bomb, he didn't have a gun. In fact, he didn't have anything in his hands at the time he was running.
I was sitting, I had his head in my knee, and the first thing I knew that it was a bullet was when I opened his shirt to see if I could help him anyway with first aid. And when I opened his shirt, I knew he'd been shot because there was a small entry wound and a large exit wound. And I was really petrified then. I couldn't believe it because he hadn't been doing anything. He hadn't, he'd been just on the march like myself. I couldn't believe it was happening around me. The bullets was coming above you, and we could hear this voice calling, "I don't want to die on my own. Please, somebody help me." And there was a man there who I knew quite well, Mr. McGuigan. You knew him as sort of an older man in the community that was a peaceful man. And this squilling went on, and he says, "If I take a white hanky and go out, they'll not shoot me." And we kept saying, "Don't go out," because everybody else was too scared to go out. And he says, "No," he says, "I'm going out." So he took a white hanky and he went out. He turned round almost immediately after he was shot in the head. And then I went hysterical then. I just went hysterical, and that was it, I just couldn't take any more. I don't know.
Can I ask you again, you in fact feel that you shot 2 men who you were satisfied were shooting at you or your men?
Yes.
Had you any compunction at all about this? Have you any regrets about what happened on Sunday?
Man tried to kill me. Why should I worry about killing him? I've got regrets that people have got to die because of the situation that is out here. But not regrets of the fact that I killed a man who was trying to kill me.
Of the two men that you hit, was any weapon found on the body?
Well, I wasn't daft enough to go across 50 yards open ground to try and pick up a weapon.
But you were satisfied that these were people who were
I'm definitely
armed?
satisfied. I'm also satisfied that when my platoon fired, they located gunmen or bombers and they fired at gunners or bombers. They did not fire indiscriminately into the crowd at any time.
Do not fire back for the moment, unless you identify positive targets.
Lord Widgery did criticise a few paratroopers for firing that he said bordered on the reckless, but he believed most of the soldiers who told him they'd shot only gunmen or nail bombers.
Those accustomed to listening to witnesses couldn't fail to be impressed by the demeanour of the soldiers of one para. They gave their evidence with confidence, without hesitation or prevarication. With one or two exceptions, I accept that they were telling the truth as they remembered it.
The barn, it came out here. You should keep clear of that. He was looking to see if there was any soldiers, so he was attempting to go across the same way. Now, as he turned around, I was still standing there. He obviously seen the soldier. He put his hand up in the air like that, and he shouted, "No, no, don't shoot." And he was shot with his arms in the air, through there, and out the back, the right-hand side. And he fell down on his back. He blessed himself, and he said, "Jesus, Jesus." It just happened to be here. It was seen. They would have shot anybody, even anybody that hadn't been in the march. If they had been walking across here, they would have been shot too.
Catching off and nothing. 13
The paratroopers who shot so many unarmed people that day had themselves come under fire in the most stressful of circumstances. The streets were full of running people. Stones were raining down on them from rooftops. There was a great deal of noise and little time to think.
Particularly in the urban area, where a gun battle takes place, I would say in 6 out of 10 occasions you never see the gunman. Because of the noise, the ricochet, the sound bouncing off the buildings, it's very difficult to ascertain where the firing's coming from unless you actually identify or see a particular gunman. Or obviously if you do see the flash.
The blokes will be hyped up. They're expecting a gunman to come. Suddenly 4 people dash out. Bang, bang, bang. I mean, you're talking about a split second. He could have thought, oh, maybe the first one had his hand in his jacket or his arm down somewhere. And he thought, oh, he's going to bring a rifle up or a pistol up or something, and bang, bang. I mean, you don't know. Feasibly, it could happen. The fella could be that hyped up with his adrenaline. It might be just the way he runs. And he's fired first.
How does he cope with it? Well, I'll tell you what. He will cope with it, provided he's alive at the end of it. If it meant that I got to face some court on some criminal charge at end of day, well, so be it. As long as I were alive, I wouldn't care.
Apart from the soldiers' statements, the only evidence that any of the dead had been firing weapons came from forensic tests on the 13 bodies. The hands of 3 of the dead were so contaminated with lead, one of the components of gunfire, that Lord Widgery concluded they must have been firing guns. And he thought that 2 of them, John Young and William Nash, were doing so around the time they were shot.
People were panicking everywhere. It was, I could hear women squealing, you know. There was a barricade just here, say from the corner of that wall where that lamppost, and also the time which is away now was the Russell Street flats, which is stood here across the street. The shooting started to get very intense. You actually see the dust as the bullets hit the barricade. I seen a fellow, William Nash, run out. I think that he went to assistance with somebody. I couldn't think of any reason why he ran out in the middle of the shooting, because it was sort of like a suicide attempt. He ran out, and he hadn't got 3 or 4 steps out, and he just plunked down like a stone just.
When he ran out, did he have anything in his hand?
He didn't have anything at all in his hands, no.
He didn't have a weapon in his hand?
Nothing at all, no.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, positive about that.
Other eyewitnesses we've spoken to confirm that John Young also wasn't firing a gun at the soldiers. He'd gone on the march dressed in his Sunday best, accompanied by his closest friend.
I knew him on side out to be hung about together. He wasn't politically minded. You know, we went to a civil rights march for civil rights, full stop. John was a devout Catholic. Me and him would go to chapel on a Sunday, whereas I would go around the corner and hide, but he would go on to chapel. And he was a teetotaler, and he wasn't interested in any kind of politics. You know, he was your sort of 16-year-old, well-dressed, 3-piece suit type person, you know. To say that he was anyway involved, had a gun or anything on him that day, anything illegal on him that day is total lies, totally.
If Nash and Young weren't firing guns, the lead contamination on their hands must have got there by some other method. Their bodies were lying by the rubble barricade. We know that a platoon of soldiers drove up in an army Saracen to retrieve them before the forensic tests were taken.
In fact, I was there when those bodies were recovered, and I ordered, in fact, the vehicle to go forward to pick them up. We did not know at that stage whether they were dead or whether they were wounded, and a vehicle went forward under the very real threat of fire, because we were still being fired at that stage.
Anybody that was lying, they lifted them, they opened up the Saracen, and they grabbed them by the wrist of the hand or the arm and the leg, whichever was convenient, and they just swung them into the Saracen.
The soldiers then drove the bodies to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, the MP, Ivan Cooper, saw what happened next.
One of the Saracens, the back doors were open, and when I looked inside, I could see dead bodies. All of these soldiers were paratroopers. They had obviously been engaged in the exercise because they were exchanging scores with each other. In other words, who had shot who, general banter about that. They then proceeded to lift the bodies out of the Saracen to take it into the hospital. They carried them either here or here into the hospital, and the legs, of course, and into the hospital. Presumably they were examined by someone in there who said, yes, they're dead, or pronounced them dead. They then carried them back out again, and the soldiers did once again, into the Saracen truck where they were ferried down to the morgue. Same procedure of handling, they were manhandled.
And the soldiers who did this carrying, did they have weapons on their shoulders?
All of the soldiers had weapons. All of them were paratroopers. All of them, I assumed from the general nature of the conversation, to have been closely involved in the exercise on the ground.
By picking them up, could the soldiers have contaminated Nash and Young with lead from their own hands? Widgery thought not. We did a test to find out. We fired an identical weapon to that used by the paratroopers in 1972. The firer then clasped the hands of a helper.
Okay. Could I have your hand, please, now? See, I'm actually getting quite a lot of material off your hand. You can see it coming up as colour on the swab.
We asked a forensic scientist with extensive experience of gunfire deposits to take samples from the helper's hand to see if it had become contaminated. We used the same chemical in our test as that used to detect the lead on Nash and Young's hands. It's called sodium rhodizonate, and it turns purple in the presence of the metal.
Our tests showed that if contaminated hands were used to shake hands with somebody else or to pull somebody else by the hand, that material is transferred onto one's hands. The test doesn't tell you if that firearm discharge residue came from somebody who fired a gun or somebody who has been contaminated by coming into contact with somebody who has fired a gun.
So how safe was Lord Widgery's conclusion that Nash and Young had probably fired a gun?
One of the big problems in forensic science is making sure that any exhibits, any items you examine are what they say they are. If Nash and Young had been tested as they lay dead on the ground in Londonderry, then we could have got good information as to what was on their hand. But once they had been handled by others, especially by people who might have firearm discharge residue on them, the value of those tests was degraded significantly. So on that basis, Lord Widgery's conclusions must be viewed as being suspect.
Forensic evidence was also used to condemn Jim Ray. Lead deposits on one of his hands led Widgery to conclude that he'd probably fired a gun, but he agreed that Ray was running away when he was shot in the back. A teacher, then a schoolboy, saw what happened next as he hid in fear behind a slatted fence.
I looked out. I didn't know who it was. I looked out, and just outside, lying on the ground, was a man, a young fella, who was lying on the ground, and he says, he looked up, he seen us through the slats, and he says, I can't move my legs. He says, I can't move, what am I going to do? Now the man says to him, don't speak, lie still, don't say anything. And the fella kept on talking, kept on trying to talk, and says, what am I going to do? I can't move my legs. And at that point I got frightened for him, and I says, look, lie still, lie still. Now, just at that point I heard a crack of a gun, and underneath his chest, he was lying up against the curb, and the curb underneath him just sort of exploded. He let a groan, at that point he let a groan, and the head went down, and he died.
There is considerable doubt about the validity of the forensic evidence found on Ray as well. Widgery wasn't told that he worked on a factory production line that involved soldering with lead, the very substance that was found on his hands after he was shot. So how safe is it to conclude from the presence of lead that a person has actually been using a weapon?
It is not safe to conclude from the presence of lead that somebody has fired a gun. This is because lead is found in the normal environment on people's clothes and on their hands. The main source of this lead is car exhaust fumes, but you also get lead on people's hands and on their clothes from various trades. One thinks here of electricians, one thinks of plumbers, one thinks of car mechanics, and many others as well. Almost anybody who works with lead will end up with lead on their hands and on their clothes.
So would the forensic evidence on those condemned by Lord Widgery as gunmen be sufficient to convict them in a court of law of a criminal offence?
In my opinion, no. There was not enough evidence on what I read in this case to convict any of these people in a criminal court of law.
Both the paratroopers and the IRA have too much to lose to reveal the full facts about Bloody Sunday. In the bitter struggle for Northern Ireland, truth comes a poor second to propaganda. But the soldiers did shoot a great many innocent people. This much is abundantly clear. Only when this is publicly accepted will the anger that Bloody Sunday evokes in Derry cease to be an obstacle to reconciliation and peace in Ireland. Lord Widgery compounded the problem.
There have been numerous allegations of soldiers shooting deliberately at individuals who were clearly unarmed. Though such a possibility cannot be excluded, in general, the accounts given by the soldiers were, in my opinion, truthful. There was no general breakdown in discipline.
You see, people are basically fair. If somebody does something that is wrong and they are brought to book for it, that they are punished for it, there's at least a reassurance that the same thing will not happen again, people will accept that. But where people do something that is evil and wrong, and somebody afterwards offers justification for somebody at the highest level, and somebody who should be the conscience of a nation justifies it, then it takes on a whole other dimension.
It's written in the Derry folklore. It'll never be forgotten. It's as relevant now, today, as it was 20 years ago when it happened, 21.
when it occurred. In 200 years' time, people will still be talking about Bloody Sunday.